Hi everybody, salam. Welcome back to my channel. So in this lesson, we are going to learn about Persian verbs. We are going to learn about their structure, pattern. We are going to go over the tenses. So for those of you who love grammar and who are very grammar focused, this lesson is for you. So far in the previous lessons, we have learned the two verbs budan and داشتن, which you can find the link to these lessons in the description box. In this lesson, we are going to cover everything you need to know about Persian verbs. Again, this lesson is very grammar focused. We are not going to make any sentences and stuff, but for those of you who love grammar like I do, you will learn a lot in this lesson and it will provide you with a very good foundation in grammar and verbs. We are going to start this lesson by going over the verb structure in Persian language. So overall verbs are divided into two groups. We have simple verbs and then we have compound verbs. Simple verbs, there are limited number of simple verbs. Maybe I would say around 10% of the verbs are simple verbs. And the rest of the 90% or 85% are compound verbs. However, compound verbs, the reason they are called compound verbs is because they have a verbal element and a non-verbal element. And the verbal element is a simple verbs. So both of these categories are very important. So we are going to go over each group a little bit more in details, and we are going to start with simple verbs. The structure of the simple verbs. Here in this table, you will see a list of simple verbs. The reason they are called simple verbs is that they are just constructed from one word. You don't see anything before that and you don't see anything after that. They are just one word. That's why they're called simple verbs. We have already learned the first one, budan, and the second one, dashtan, in previous lessons. But now here are more examples. So this one is khordan, didan, guftan, and raftan. As I said in the previous slide, there are limited number of simple verbs, and nowadays the simple verbs are being replaced by compound verbs. Now that we are learning about the structure of simple verbs, let's also go over the infinitives in Persian. So in English, infinitive verbs are preceded by the word to, for example, to speak, to read, to write, but in Persian, they are not preceded by any specific word. And then infinitives in Persian ends in either dan or tan. So when you see the ending dan or tan, that will give you a clue that you are looking at a verb in its infinitive form. So we have already learned budan and dashtan in previous lessons, but here more examples. So khordan, didan. So these two verbs end in the ending dan, and then goftan and raftan. These two verbs end in the ending tan. So all the verbs in Persian in its infinitive form, remember, ends either in dan or tan. When it comes to verbs, another important topic that you need to know are about verb stems. We have two types of verb stems in Persian. We have the present stem and then we have past stems. For the present stems, we can come up with other present tenses, for example, present progressive, simple present. And with past stems, we can come up with other past tenses, for example, past perfect, present perfect. So we're not going to go into any more details when it comes to stems. You will learn about them when we get to the lesson about different tenses. But this is just to giving you an introduction about verb stems. We finished the simple verbs. Now we are going to move on to the second group, which are verbs that are called compound verbs. The structure of the compound verbs. Unlike simple verbs that they are only constructed from one word only, compound verbs are constructed from a non-verbal element, which could either be a noun, an adjective, or a preposition, and then a verbal element, and the verbal element is a simple verb. Let's take a look at three examples here. For example, here we have the noun rah, which means path or route. And then the verbal element is raftan. Raftan is a simple verb and it means to go. So these two, the noun راه and the simple verb رفتن, when they are put next to each other, they form a compound verb, and the meaning is to walk. Another example, we have the adjective here, بزرگ. بزرگ means big. And then we have the simple verb شدن. شدن, it means to become. So these two, when they are next to each other as a compound verb, بزرگ شدن, it means to grow up. Like literally, it means to become big, so to grow up. And then another example with preposition, we have بر here. بر is a preposition and it means on. And then we have the simple verb گشتن here. گشتن, it means to look, like to look around or maybe to look for. And then these two next to each other, برگشتن, it means to return. As I said earlier, compound verbs are very important to learn because maybe around 90 to 95% of the Persian verbs are compound verbs. There's an important point that you need to know when it comes to translating the compound verbs. I'm going to explain it by using this example here. So we have here we have the compound verb بیدار شدن. If you know the meaning of the non-verbal part بیدار and you know the meaning of the simple verb or the verbal part شدن, then it's kind of easy to guess the meaning of this verb. So to become awake, it means to wake up. However, this method does not work with all verbs. For example, here we have زمین, which means ground, and then خوردن, it means to eat. So the meaning of this verb, it doesn't mean to eat the ground, but it means to sleep, to fall. So in this case, translating word by word might not be very helpful. Another example, sar, it means head, and then zadan, to hit. So sar zadan, if you are translating word by word, it's going to mean something like to hit your head or something, but it means to visit. So another example that might not be helpful. So if translating word by word is helpful, then go for it. But if it's not helpful and it doesn't make too much sense, just try to memorize the whole verb as one word and do not get too much caught up in the meaning of each part. Now let's go over to the most important verbal part or simple verb, which is the verb کردن. کردن, it means to do or to undertake an action. However, you need to know that کردن doesn't come by itself. It always needs to come with a non-verbal element, which is usually a noun. Let's take a look at a few examples. For example, in this table on the right side, the first one we have کار. کار means work, right? So when we combine it with کردن, it would be کار کردن, so to work. Next one is زندگی. زندگی means life. So when combined with کردن, it would give us زندگی کردن, to live. Next one is ازدواج. ازدواج is marriage. So ازدواج کردن, it means to get married. Next is تمیز. So تمیز کردن means to clean. Next one is بازی. So بازی کردن, it means to play. Next one is خرید. خرید کردن means to shop. And then next one is تماشا. So تماشا کردن means to watch. So we just learned about the verbal element کردن, and a majority of the verbs come with this verbal element or with this simple verb. However, there are other common verbal elements as well. For example, you will see a lot of verb with a verbal element or again simple verb داشتن, بودن, گشتن, زدن. دادن is also very common. You will see also a lot of verbs with this verbal element, دادن. and then کشیدن and دیدن. There is a super important point that you need to know here, and is that anytime we want to change the tense, for example, we want to change it from past tense to present tense, or we want to conjugate the verb, we want to negate the verb, any changes to the verb, we need to change the verbal element, meaning the simple verb. For example, here, کار کردن, it means to work. Let's say we want to give it a tense, or we want to change the tense, we want to conjugate it, we want to negate it, we need to change the verbal element. Although there is an exception, which we will learn later, that this non-verbal part will get conjugated, but that's only for like some specific verbs, and there are exceptions, and we will learn about them later. There's a very common pattern among Persian verbs that I'm going to explain it by using this example here. So here we have آماده. آماده means ready. So when آماده comes with the verbal element کردن, then it means to make ready, which is transitive. But when the verbal element changes from کردن to بودن, it means to be ready. So now it changed from a transitive verb to an intransitive verb. It can also come with the verbal element شدن. Then it means to get ready. This is also intransitive. Let's take a look at another example. For example, درست. درست here is an adjective, which means correct. When it comes with the verbal element کردن, it means to fix, to make. For example, to make dinner, or to fix like a broken car. When it comes with the verbal element بودن, it means to be correct. When, for example, something is correct, which it changed from transitive to intransitive. And when it comes with the verbal element شدن, it means to get corrected. For example, when something gets corrected. Then this one also is intransitive. So this is a very common pattern that you will see among many verbs, not all verbs, many verbs. And it will be very helpful to know when like the verbal element کردن changes to, for example, بودن or شدن, how the meaning changes. Again, this is just a general rule. It doesn't apply to all verbs. This is just something for you guys to help you as a guideline. And now we are going to go over the three forms of compound verb, as you can see here. The phrasal compound verbs, splitable compound verbs, and one-person or indirect compound verbs. I'm just going to give you a little bit of explanation for each form, so you just know about them. The first form of compound verbs are called phrasal compound verbs. I'm going to use this example to explain this point. So this is a phrasal compound verb, meaning that this verb is constructed from a verbal element, like a simple verb, and then two non-verbal elements. So we don't have only one non-verbal element, we have more than one. Here we have two. So here the verb is پیاده روی کردن. پیاده, it means by foot. روی or رو is the present stem of the verb رفتن, to go. We just add an E to it. And then the verbal element کردن, which means to do. So when these elements are being put next to each other, it constructs a verb and it means to go for a walk. پیاده روی کردن. You will see this construct among many verbs. You will see a noun part, and then the present stem of a verb, and then the verbal element کردن. Let's see another example. We have تصمیم گیری کردن. It means to make a decision. But going word by word, تصمیم is decision, گیری is the present stem. It comes from the present stem of the verb گرفتن, to get, and then the verbal part کردن, to do. So the whole thing is a verb. On the left side, you will see two other examples. So here we have another verb, به دنیا آمدن. So word by word, به means to, like a preposition to, and then دنیا is word, and then آمدن is to come. So to come to word, it means to be born. So here you have to, the whole thing is a compound verb. Sometimes you will see preposition and you think that you need to add like an object after the preposition, but no, just the whole thing is a compound verb, and it's called a phrasal compound verbs. And as you can see, the non-verbal element is more than one. It's a preposition and also a noun. Let's take a look at another one here. So دور هم جمع شدن. So one verbal element, and then more than actually three non-verbal elements. So it means door, it's a preposition, it means around. Ham, it means each other, it's an adverb. And jam means collected, and shodan is to become. So like literally to become collected around each other. It means to get together, for example, to get together for a party or something. So when you know the construct of these verbs, it would be easier for you guys to memorize them, and also it would be easier to use them. Now let's go over the second form of compound verbs, which is called the splitable compound verbs. So here we have a verb, سوال کردن, to ask a question. So, but what if we want to say to ask a hard question? So now the noun question has a modifier, and the modifier is hard, like it has an adjective. Then in this situation, we need to break up or split the compound verb, and then the modifier comes after the noun. So سوال سخت کردن, and we need to connect سوال to the adjective with an اضافه. And then the verbal part کردن, we need to conjugate it, or we need to give a tense to. This is just the infinitive form. Let's see another one. We have دوش گرفتن. It means to take a shower. But what if now we want to say to take a quick shower? For example, he took a quick shower, something like this. Then shower, which is douche, has a modifier quick. So in this case, we need again to split the compound verb, and then the modifier comes after the noun, and we need to connect that with اضافه. And then we need to conjugate this one, and whatever the tense is, to just give a tense to the verbal part, to the simple verb. The next form of compound verbs is called one-person compound verbs, or they are also called indirect compound verbs. So this form is very confusing for the students, but the good news is that there are limited number of indirect verbs, maybe around 40, which you just need to memorize them, and most of them are used in the informal spoken language. And I'm going to use this example here to explain why is it confusing. It is confusing because like this verb here, خوش آمدن, it means to like. So if you want to conjugate this verb and you want to say, for example, I like this book, then the subject is I. So the non-verbal part now needs to be conjugated to the attached possessive adjective of the subject, which is I, which the attached possessive adjective is the letter mim. And then آمدن needs to be conjugated to third person singular. So a little bit literally, the translation would be like the likeness is coming to you. Another example here, for example, گرم. گرم, it means warm, and then بودن, to be. So if you want to say, for example, I want to say yesterday I was hot in the car, something like this, then again you need to conjugate گرم to first person singular, the attached possessive adjective of that, and then this one gets conjugated to third person singular. So if you still found it confusing, don't worry about it. There's a whole lesson about one-person indirect verbs. You will learn about it later. For now, my purpose is just to introduce you guys to it, and then later on you will learn about it. Now let's go over conjugating Persian verbs. So conjugation in Persian is very easy and very straightforward because it always corresponds to the subject. There's just one exception for third person singular, that conjugation changes when the tense changes. But beside that, beside third person singular, all the other subject pronouns like man, to, ما, شما, آنها, all of them, it doesn't matter what tense we have, this is the conjugations that you need to know, except for imperative, which is there's no ending. So this is, I think this is a very good news. You know, in some languages, when the tense changes, all the conjugations changes too. So that's very confusing. But thank God in Persian, we don't have to worry about that. So this is just a conjugation that you have to memorize. And also for third person singular, there's just some exceptions that you need to know, which is actually is not that difficult because they are grouped in some categories. For example, you need to add the letter dal to form like 4 tenses, or no conjugation for like this 4 tenses here. And then there's a ast for 1 tense and then bud for another tense. In this slide, you will see a list of tenses that are used in the Persian language. So for those of you who love tenses and who are familiar with tenses, you will really like this slide and the next following slides. So as you can see here, the tenses are grouped into 3 categories. So in the next slides, we will go into each group a little bit more in details, just a little bit just to give you an introduction. But overall, just know that tenses in Persian are easier than English, because in English tenses are very distinct and very specific, but in Persian there's a lot of overlap among tenses, and also usually the time adverbs or usually the context gives out more clues and makes the tense more specific. So I'm going to explain this more in the following slides. But so far, if you look at this slide here, you will see that many tenses are similar to English tenses as well. Now let's go over the present tenses in Persian first. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about them. So as I said in the previous slide, I said that tenses in Persian are not as distinct as in English, and usually the context and time adverbs gives out clues as to what tense we are referring to. For example, here, the simple present tense, I play football every day. As you can see here, this tense is very similar, like this verb or the tense of this verb is very similar to this one, which is future tense, and it's very similar to this one, it's actually the same as present progressive tense. So by knowing one tense, you can use it in 3 different formats. And usually in this case, the time adverbs make the tense more specific, or the context. And then also, there's just 2 other things that you need to know. For present progressive, we have another variation to present progressive, which is only used in the spoken language, that we use an auxiliary verb, which is, this one is also optional. We don't have to use it. And the other thing you need to know is that we do have a formal future tense as well, but this one is only used in the written formal language. And here's is the tense. So later on, we are going to learn all these tenses individually. Again, this is just to give you an introduction of what's coming in Persian when learning different tenses. Now let's go quickly over the past tenses in Persian. As you can see in this table, you can also find these tenses in English too, except for imperfect tense. There's no tenses called imperfect tense in English, and the equivalent will be past progressive in English. And then in Persian, we do also have past progressive, which is very close to imperfect as well. And here are some examples. I'm not going to go into the examples and explain to you how we form this, because later on we are going to learn how to form each tenses individually. And then in Persian, we have 4 moods. We have the imperative moods, which we also have it in English. And then we have present subjunctive mood, which there's really no direct equivalent to present subjunctive. I know English also has subjunctive, but it's not really the same as the present subjunctive in Persian. And then we have, in Persian, we have past subjunctive, which equals to conditional perfect, for example, with the would have. And then we have present perfect subjunctive. This one also equals to the conditional perfects with the would have. And there are some tenses in English that there's no direct counterparts for that in Persian. For example, the future perfect in English is just the future tense in Persian. Or the future progressive in English is just the future tense in Persian. Or the past present progressive in Persian is just present progressive. Or the past perfect progressive in Persian is just past progressive. That's why I told you a little bit earlier that tenses in Persian are a little bit easier than in English, because as you can see here, in English they're very distinct. In Persian they are less distinct and they overlap, and usually the time adverbs and the context makes the tense more specific. Stay tuned for the next lesson because we are going to learn about simple past tense. We reached the end of this lesson. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If so, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also share this video. Also, if you have any questions or if you have any comment or feedback, please leave it in the comment section. That would really help me a lot. And also your support is greatly appreciated here. See you in another lesson. Khuda Hafiz.